Okay, good. So welcome everybody, and I wanted to take our time today to continue our Passover conversation. We set the stage last time, just talking about Exodus chapter 12 as the basis for Passover as we observe it today. And talking about just the general principles of the holiday. Today, what I want to focus on is the intensity of the Passover kosher laws. I'm just letting somebody else in. So I want to focus on the Passover kosher laws today and give an opportunity for people to ask questions as well. Next week, we'll talk about the Seder and talk about the different parts of the Seder. What's the minimal requirement to make a Seder a so-called kosher, and that is not that the food served is kosher, but that the Seder itself fulfills the halachic requirements of a Seder. So anything that fulfills the halachic requirement is called kosher. So it doesn't, the term kosher doesn't just apply to food. It could apply to a Torah scroll. A Torah scroll is kosher if it's written in the correct form and there are no mistakes, etc. So a lulav and an etrog could be kosher because they're unblemished and they're the right length, etc. Okay, so the kosher for Passover laws are based on Exodus 12 also, where it says in verse 19, Shivat Yamim Se'or lo yimatzeh bevatechem, translated in the Eitz Chaim, no leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days. And it goes on, Ki kol ochel machmetzet v'nichreta hanefesh hahi me'adat Yisrael. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the community of Israel. So the term there for leaven are two words, se'or, or also machmetzet, which the root is chametz. So two things: we're not allowed to have chametz in our possession, in our homes, for the entirety of the holiday of Passover. And if we eat chametz, we will be cut off from the community of Israel. So the transgression of the commandment of not eating chametz and also not having chametz in our possession is excommunication. So it's a serious commandment on the level of Shabbat, and therefore all of the laws surrounding chametz then take on that serious nature. So what this means for us today is clearly, how do we go about getting rid of chametz in our possession? What qualifies as chametz? And how do we ensure that we are not eating chametz at all over the holiday of Passover? So let's tackle this from easier to more difficult. Not having chametz in our possession is defined by the rabbis in a manner that could be seen as a loophole for how it is put into practice today. So the rabbis understood, a general principle of the rabbis is developing the system of Jewish law in a way that the majority of the population can observe it. So the rabbis could have developed the system of Jewish law. They could have interpreted the Torah and come up with a system that would be on the level that rabbis could observe it. Instead, what the rabbis did was develop a system of Jewish law for the average person to observe. Okay, so there's a difference there. There are, that we could imagine that when it says in this verse that we are not supposed to, that leaven should not be found in our homes for 7 days, that the rabbis, if they were teaching Judaism just for the rabbis, they might have said, get rid, literally, get rid of all the chametz from your homes. That is, not a crumb of chametz should be found, not in your pantry, not in your freezer, not in your refrigerator. Nowhere in your home should there be found chametz. So that if you have unopened cans of food that have chametz in them, you have unopened boxes of pasta, you have to get rid of those also. We could imagine the rabbis could have said that. In that case, most people would have to budget their meals accordingly so that they don't waste any chametz that might be left over that is still unopened. And so the rabbis understood, first of all, most people don't budget that well. Secondly, most people don't have the money to afford to get rid of unopened chametz from their homes and then start from scratch with kosher for Passover food. So the rabbis understood that they needed to come up with another way to fulfill the commandment in the Torah, chapter 12, verse 19, that leaven should not be found in your homes. So they then, in a very legal kind of way, understood, well, if we have the people sell their chametz to someone else, then though it's in their homes, it's not in their possession. So, and that loophole that the rabbis developed then allowed for the average Jew to be able to afford to observe Passover. Now, not to say that kosher for Passover food is cheap, but to prepare for Passover, at least it's affordable in that anything unopened or anything that's in your freezer that could last post Passover can be put aside and covered up and included in the sale to someone not Jewish who is not obligated to observe Passover. So point number one, for no leaven should be found in your home for the entire Passover holiday is interpreted by the rabbis in this loophole, affordable way to sell your chametz to somebody not Jewish. The way we do it at Sharei Tefillah, and the way most people do this who belong to synagogues around the world, is you fill out a form where you authorize me to be your agent to sell your chametz. I will sell everybody's chametz. I have a pile of those forms that is included with a document that I share with the custodian of our synagogue, who will buy the chametz from everyone in the synagogue and anybody else who you want to include on your list. So I've included my children in the list. I filled out a separate form for each one of them so that their food can be sold. The purpose of selling the food is because the verse says, whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the community of Israel. So chametz that hasn't been sold then has to be gotten rid of. And if it isn't gotten rid of or sold, and you eat it after Passover is over, then we are in violation of this commandment of not eating leaven that hasn't been sold. The rabbis add that detail to this list. We sell this chametz in order that we can eat it after Passover is over. We're not allowed to eat chametz that belongs to a Jewish person that hasn't been sold or gotten rid of appropriately. Okay? So another aspect of this is that when we go to the supermarket after Passover is over, if you were to go into Shalom's or Moti's after Passover and want to buy bread there to eat, you can trust that you can buy the bread there because Shalom's and Moti's have sold all the chametz in their store to somebody else. And the sale is on condition that as soon as the holiday is over, it's bought back. So that we can be confident as the Jewish consumer that we can go into Shalom's and Kosher Mart or any kosher restaurant as soon as the holiday is over and as soon as it's open, that the chametz that they serve is kosher chametz, that it has been sold and bought back appropriately, or it's brand new chametz. The problem with this, because when I first moved to Shaarei Tefillah 26 years ago, the giant food stores were still owned by a Jew, Izzy Cohen, right? I think he was the owner of Giant. So Izzy Cohen, a Jew, did not sell his supermarket chain to a non-Jew, which made it complicated that if you wanted to buy Wonder Bread after Passover from Giant, that bread, like if you went, like this year, Passover is over Sunday night, April 4th. If you wanted to stock up on chametz in Giant, it doesn't apply now to Giant. Giant's now owned by some chain of some company in the Netherlands. But at the time, 26 years ago, if you wanted to go April 4th, as soon as Passover is over, to Giant to stock up on bread, you couldn't do that because the chametz technically was owned by a Jew and it wasn't sold, and you'd have to wait a couple of days until the new stock of bread went onto the shelf. And that would apply to anything that had been in the store that was chametz that was entered the store during Passover. Okay, so that's the problem with a Jew owning chametz who does not sell the chametz before Passover. That not only can that Jew not eat it, but anybody else cannot share in that, cannot buy it from him or her, and cannot consume it themselves. It's not just consuming it, but deriving any benefit from it. So whatever else we might do with the chametz besides eating it, if it's for our own benefit in some way, we cannot do that. We cannot derive any benefit from chametz that has not been gotten rid of or hasn't been sold appropriately for Passover. So that's the easy one about selling and getting rid of chametz. The other aspect of this, so any questions or comments about this before we go on to the next aspect of it?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay, I'm just slightly confused. When you say, so if it was owned by a Jew only who failed to sell it,
right.
It's not kosher after Passover. But if let's say it's a store like Shoppers or Harris Teeter, not Jewish owned,
It doesn't matter. That's fine.
It's okay, or is
Yes.
it considered still? We shouldn't buy it. We shouldn't get it.
Okay, so the law of chametz only applies to Jews. Okay, only people who are obligated to follow these commandments have to follow these commandments. So that's why I said it doesn't apply today to Giant, because Giant isn't owned by Izzy Cohen anymore. It's owned by this company in Holland. So non-Jews don't have to follow the laws of Passover. Therefore, a non-Jew can buy a non-Jew can buy the chametz from us, can buy it from me, right? I sell the chametz, everybody's who fills out a form and sends it to me. That all of that, I am your agent in selling your chametz to the non-Jew that I sell it to. Therefore, so I muted you, Elizabeth. So so all of your food that you sell to me is taken care of so that you store it away during Passover and then take it out when Passover is over and you can eat it. You can go into Harris Teeter, you can go into Safeway, you can go into Giant. It doesn't, after Passover and buy any food there, it's totally fine because all those stores are owned by non-Jews. Okay? So it only applies to, this law only applies to Jews who have to get rid of, we have to get rid of our chametz before Passover, and we cannot gain any kind of benefit from our chametz after Passover. It's
okay. That was the
okay?
question. Just whether. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Got it.
So it would be in a category of chametz she'avar alav haPesach, that chametz that endured Passover without being taken care of appropriately. After Pesach, can you buy bread at Giant that was baked during Passover? Yes, because the assumption is it was baked by non-Jews, stocked on the shelf of a non-Jewish owned establishment, and therefore we can derive benefit from chametz that was produced by non-Jews. So what the fascinating thing about this would then be that the bread that we buy, assuming we buy kosher bread, kosher certified bread, so bread can be produced on Passover in a facility, I don't know, like Arnold Bakeries. Okay, wherever Arnold Bakeries is, that's the pumpernickel bread I buy. So Arnold bread. So Arnold bread, I think, has a Kuf K for the certification on it. So whoever the Kuf K rabbi is who goes to that Arnold bakery would go in during Passover to supervise it, and the bread would be produced as kosher bread, but it's chametz produced on Passover by a non-Jew, but supervised by a Jew so that it's kosher, and you can buy it after Passover. That's totally fine to do. The non-Jew, the rabbi who's there to supervise the factory isn't touching the chametz. He's not deriving any benefit from that chametz. He's just watching to make sure that all the ingredients going into making that bread is kosher. And so it's produced, that chametz is produced on Passover by a non-Jew, certified by a Jew as kosher, and you can buy it after Passover. Okay, so if you thought, and I said that this was the easy part. So the next stage is, a principle of kashrut is that we're not supposed to mix meat and milk together, right? We all know that principle. Not just that meat has to be, the animal has to be slaughtered in a particular way and then inspected to make sure that there are no blemishes on the internal organs, and then blood drained and soaked and salted. So that's all about meat. But we also know that meat and dairy products are not supposed to be cooked together, not to be eaten together, etc. However, there is a principle, again, with the rabbis understanding that they are teaching for the average Jew, not teaching for the rabbis. Rabbis themselves might be willing and able to be on a higher level of observance and willing to give up more in order to observe. The rabbis are teaching to a lower common denominator. They understood that mistakes happen, and that when it comes to mixing meat and milk, for example, they have the principle of batel b'shishim, that it is canceled out in 60, which means if you're cooking a large pot of chicken soup, for example, a large pot of chicken soup, and a drop of milk falls into it by accident, you don't have to throw the chicken soup away. You can still eat the chicken soup, even though there's one drop of milk that had fallen into it, because the drop is less than 1/60th the volume of the chicken soup. 1/60th is a concept of kosher law. However, 1/60th does not apply to chametz on Passover. On Passover, microscopic drops of chametz or crumbs of chametz are still absolutely prohibited. And you cannot have any drop of chametz at all mixed into your kosher for Passover food. So even though a drop, let's say a drop of chicken soup in a vat of hot chocolate, or a drop of milk in a vat of chicken soup, you can still consume that because the one drop doesn't affect the kashrut of the bigger vat. That does not apply for chametz mixing with kosher for Passover, because the verse says you cannot eat chametz on Passover, and the rabbis decided not to do the 1/60th for chametz. They decided to read this quite literally and say absolutely no chametz on Passover, which then leads to the more complex supervision of facilities that produce kosher for Passover food to ensure, first, that, for example, for matzah, which is a grain product, that no fermentation, that would be the seor from this verse, that no fermentation has taken place in the production of the matzah, and then also to ensure that no chametz at all had ever touched the vessels, production equipment, and no chametz at all in any of the ingredients to make anything that is certified kosher for Passover. So what makes kosher for Passover food more expensive than regular kosher year-round food is the cleaning that has to take place to in a chametz facility to make it kosher for Passover, and then the ingredients, inspection of the ingredients to make sure that there's nothing chametz in the ingredients to ensure that the product is kosher for Passover. So what this entails, of course, is the understanding then which products we can buy in a supermarket for Passover that don't need to be certified at all, which products we can buy before Passover without a kosher for Passover certification that can be used on Passover, and which products need to have a kosher for Passover certification on them in order to eat them on Passover. So there are three categories there. There's certain food that by definition are not chametz at all, and you don't have to worry about them needing a kosher for Passover certification on them. I always refer to this list. I sent out a link to this. It's a little bit complicated to follow, but it's the Passover guide of my rabbinical assembly, produced by the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Conservative Movement. And every year they produce this guide. I sent it out on the listserv last week. I'll send it out again. I think it was in the Daf HaShavua as well. There are foods that can be eaten that don't require a certification are, and this is on page 9, there are certain chemicals like baking soda and bicarbonate of soda, by definition, are not chametz at all, even how they're made. So they don't need a kosher for Passover certification. Right. What would the rabbis think of food today that replicates a cheeseburger, fish meat that looks like shellfish, tofu that substitutes for pork in Chinese dishes? Most rabbis say, Gesundheit, do this. Absolutely do it. We get a magazine monthly called Fleischig magazine, and there's an advert. It's a great magazine for gourmet kosher Fleischig cooking. Just look it up online. It might be available online. Fleischig, Fleishig, Fleischig magazine. So their Passover edition just came out this past week. There's an advertisement in there for vegan substitute for meat, pork, shellfish, and other seafood products. So I don't know the brand name, but you can have vegan fish, you can have vegan lobster, you can have vegan pork. And the rabbis would say, yes, absolutely do it. Whatever makes it easier for people to keep kosher, then you should absolutely do. So eggs, I'm back to the list of food that does not need to be certified kosher for Passover. Eggs, fresh fruits and vegetables, right? So just go to the produce stand in the supermarket, all that. There's nothing chametz at all in that. Fresh or frozen kosher meat. So the meat that you buy at Moti's or Shalom's year-round is kosher for Passover. It says here, except for chopped meat. Sometimes there are other things that are mixed in with the chopped meat. I'm not sure that that's really done anymore. I think the kosher chopped meat that we buy, as opposed to hot dogs. Hot dogs have lots of other stuff with it that's in them, but chopped meat usually does not. It's just 100% meat that goes through the grinder. So I'm not sure why it says other than chopped meat has to be kosher or Passover, but if you're going to Moti's or Shalom's, you don't have to worry about it. Whatever you buy there will be kosher for Passover. Now, certain tea and coffee is kosher for Passover year-round. All you have to do, you can't, so if it's already open, let's see, this year Passover starts on Saturday night, March 27th. If your coffee container is already open before Passover, even though it's 100% coffee, it's not flavored coffee. Like, so in my house, we have hazelnut coffee. So that is not kosher. That would have to be kosher certified for Passover. And I don't think there is such a thing as kosher certified hazelnut coffee. But 100% coffee, even if it's ground, it's processed, but it's 100% coffee. Nothing else in the coffee production facility, there's no chametz that is mixed in with that. It's only decaf coffee that has chametz in the decaffeinating process. So decaf, 100% coffee that is decaf, 100% tea that is decaf has to be certified kosher for Passover because the decaffeination process has chametz in it. But regular coffee, regular tea, that is pure black, green, or white tea leaves, just the leaves themselves, not what you find in the bags, which are instant and therefore processed in some way. So tea has to be kosher for, the tea bags have to be kosher for Passover. Tea, no, that's not true. Unflavored tea bags, it says on this list, are totally fine. So 100% tea bags, not flavored, is perfectly fine for Passover. Unflavored regular coffee, all kosher for Passover. Oh, it's actually kosher for Passover and year-round use. It's only decaf that would need to be certified kosher for Passover. Extra virgin olive oil does not need a kosher for Passover symbol on it. As long as it has a kosher symbol on it, it's kosher for Passover. Extra virgin olive oil does not have any chametz at all in the process. It's not Lipton, it's Nestea. Dad, on this list it says Nestea, not Lipton. Nestea, regular, and decaf are kosher for Passover, not Lipton. Extra virgin olive oil, whole or gutted fresh fish doesn't need to be certified kosher for Passover. Whole or half pecans, and whole unground spices and nuts. Now, that's usually we buy spices that are already ground. The grinding and the processing of spices has chametz mixed in, potentially. So ground spices in the form that we buy them have to be kosher for Passover. Now, there are some things that can be purchased before Passover for use on Passover, even though there might be a suspect of chametz in it. And here's where the loophole comes in. There's a suspicion, for example, when we buy milk, the milk that we buy year-round is fortified with vitamin A and D. The source for the vitamin A and D might be chametz. If you just get milk from a cow, there's no chametz there, right? There's nothing chametz about milk. It's the processed milk that we buy in the supermarket because it's pasteurized, but there's nothing chametz in the pasteurization process. It's the addition of vitamin A and D that's added to the milk. That addition could have chametz. Doesn't mean that it does. It could. When we sell our chametz before Passover, and we burn our chametz before Passover, we say a formula that any chametz that could be in our possession, it's now considered like dust of the earth. That includes the vitamin A and D that's in the milk that you buy before Passover, so that you can drink that milk during Passover. During Passover, you have to buy kosher for Passover certified milk. Before Passover, you don't. Now, this might not make sense to us. If I said, like I said earlier, we cannot consume chametz on Passover at all, we'd be excommunicated. For the rabbis, this standard of kashrut when it comes to something like milk or filleted fish. So let's say we buy our fish in the 2 or 3 pound container of salmon from Costco. So, you can buy like this big piece of salmon fillet. We buy it at Costco. According to this list, I can buy that fish before Passover and use it on Passover, because the slight possibility of a chance that there might have been a bit of chametz on the knife that was used to fillet that salmon and cut it into pieces to put it on that styrofoam board and then saran wrap it and put it out for display is sold when I sell my chametz before Passover. So I can't buy that salmon during Passover from Costco unless it has a kosher for Passover certification on it. But before Passover, something that has a slight suspect is nullified when we nullify our chametz before Passover. So milk, fresh frozen fruit, pure white sugar with no additives, quinoa. We make sure there's nothing mixed in with the quinoa, that pure, fresh quinoa, and white milk, not chocolate milk or strawberry milk or vanilla milk, but white milk. That is not the nut milks like almond or soy or cashew milk, but cow's milk, all of these things you can buy before Passover. The slight chance that there's chametz in it is nullified when we sell our chametz, and we can consume it during Passover. That's one complication. Does the milk standard apply to plain butter and plain and unflavored yogurt? No, it does not. Yogurts, the process of yogurt is fermentation, and that therefore is some kind of chametz that could be in it. So yogurt has to, no matter what kind of yogurt you're buying, even plain with non-vanilla, the plain, non-fat, whatever yogurt has to be kosher for Passover. Butter has to say kosher for Passover. Cottage cheese, cream cheese, all of that, they're processed in some way. The processing could have chametz in it, and that's too much chametz, and that's more of a sense that there definitely is chametz in it. That is not nullified before Passover, and that all of those products, those dairy products, have to have a kosher for Passover symbol on them. Now, the other aspect of this, of course, so with the chance, not just by purchasing chametz, purchasing food for Passover, but it's also the preparing of the food in our homes on Passover. So this gets to the whole cleaning of our kitchens and cleaning of our houses. Anywhere in our house that we might be eating food during the year, those rooms have to be cleaned thoroughly to make sure that there's no chametz in there. I know some people, who would take a book off the shelf and read while they're eating. So there are some people I know who will take every single book off their shelf before Passover and leaf through the pages upside down to see if any crumbs come out of them. I don't go to that extent in my house to take every book off the shelf, but we do go around our rooms and vacuum extra carefully to make sure that we get all the chametz up that we can. So that's just in the rest of the house. In the kitchen is a very difficult and complicated process, as we know. And koshering, to make utensils kosher for Passover, is a process that is available and has been talked about by the rabbis and legislated by the rabbis. Usually, the level of heat used for the vessel is how you kosher that vessel. So, for example, if you use a pot to boil things in them, right? So if you use a pot usually used to make soup or to boil water to cook vegetables in, something like that, you kosher that pot by putting water in, boiling the water and letting the boil roll over the sides. Now, all of this, what I'm about to say, is koshering utensils that we use during the year for use on Passover. We can do that. The easier way to do it is to have designated kosher for Passover utensils. Put away your chametz pots and pans and cooking utensils, and take out the kosher for Passover ones. That is, if you can afford a whole separate slew of utensils that are only going to be used for a couple of weeks a year. Many people do have all these separate pots and pans and cooking utensils, but if you don't, pots and pans and utensils, many of them can be koshered the easiest thing is, as long as they are all metal. If you have utensils that have a plastic end to them or plastic handles on them, you can't kosher them, because you can't kosher plastic because plastic melts. Plastic does not withstand the requisite heat that would be required in order to make the utensil kosher. This applies if you, by accident, cook chicken soup in a pot that you had boiled milk in. So if you had boiled milk in a pot, that makes that pot a dairy pot. You make that pot fleishik, or if it's a fleishik pot and you want to make it dairy, you can kosher it as long as it's all metal. Unless the handles can be removed and then cleaned, or replaced, you can't kosher a pot or a pan that has any kind of handle on it. But if it's all metal, you can kosher it. So from meat to dairy, from dairy to meat, or from meat or dairy to Passover, the way to do a pot is put water in the pot to a level that when it boils, the water boils over the side. It makes a mess, but then the pot becomes kosher for Passover. Eating utensils, your silverware, if it's all metal, can be koshered in the same way. So you don't necessarily have to buy new silverware for Passover. You can kosher your meat and dairy silverware as long as it's all metal. And just put them one at a time into your pot of boiling water. As long as the water keeps on boiling, you kosher your silverware. Plasticware cannot be koshered. Glassware can be koshered because glass is not porous and it doesn't stain. Glass is the easiest. Some say all you have to do is clean it, let it sit for 24 hours not using, and then you can use it, whether it had been meat and now used for dairy, or dairy and now used for meat, or dairy or meat now used for Passover. 100% glass, no designs on it, nothing else added to it, just 100% glass can be koshered quite easily. Pyrex, which looks like glass, cannot be koshered because Pyrex is fake glass, Pyrex stains, and you cannot kosher Pyrex for Passover. Can we eat meals during Passover on your back? You can eat meals for Passover wherever you want. The idea is the utensils that you're eating the meals with. It's not where you're eating it, it's how you're preparing it and what you're using to eat it with. Okay, so it's not about where you're eating it, it's about how you're preparing it and what you're preparing it on. Okay, so the utensils have to be kosher for Passover. The cooking utensils have to be kosher for Passover. Our stove tops and ovens have to be kosher for Passover because food drips, and that means CHAMETZ drips. And so this guide also delineates for us how best we can clean stovetops and ovens for Passover. Not just cleaning them, but also having the flames on to the highest temperature for several minutes after the stovetop and the oven has been thoroughly cleaned. There are differences between electric coil stovetops versus gas flame stovetops versus the invection kind of stovetop, which looks like just a piece of glass. There is a way to kosher that too. The electric coil and that's the old-fashioned kind of electric stovetop, but also the modern just flat piece of glass stovetop. They are kosherable. It's just a little bit complicated. I'm not going to get into that here. You can email me separately, privately, and I can show you to a website or a YouTube video that will show you how to do that. An electric oven or a gas oven are cleaned in the same way. If they are self-cleaning, that's the easiest way to do it. You have to take the racks out, clean the racks first, then you can put them back in the oven and then put the oven on with self-cleaning with the racks in the oven, and then clean out all the ashes afterwards, and then your oven is kosher for Passover. Refrigerators just have to be wiped down, emptied out, wiped down thoroughly clean. The shelves and the sides and everything and the drawers, everything clean, and that's fine. You don't have to put any kind of extra coverings or linings on the shelves after you clean them. Dishwashers, I say, can be made kosher for Passover. Some people say they cannot be. The racks that are in the dishwasher are built even though they are not metal racks. There are some dishwashers that do have metal racks in them, and that's the easiest. But most dishwashers do not have metal racks. They have like this hard rubberized plastic material. The way to kosher a dishwasher for Passover would be to run the dishwasher empty with the soap in it for a complete cycle. And that intense heat and the soap in it cleans out the dishwasher, drains any little bit of chametz that still be in there. And then it's kosher for Passover, easily done. Countertops, which we use to prepare food on, which would mean you're preparing chametz on your countertops. So therefore, countertops have to be made kosher for Passover. If you have granite or marble or some hard stone material countertops, they are easily koshered. You have to clean them thoroughly and then pour boiling water on your countertops, and then they're kosher for Passover. If you're like me and don't want to have boiling water pouring all over your kitchen floor, what I do, and if you're like me and you have like this hot water dispenser that's at your sink, I put a rag or a clean rag or a dish towel and get it soaking wet with that hot water from the hot water dispenser. And I use that dish towel to wipe down the granite countertops that we have. And that's how I do it enough so that my hand is still really hurting while I'm using that dish towel. Once the dish towel cools off and I haven't finished wiping down the granite countertop, then I go back to the hot water dispenser, make the dish towel wet with that newly hot water again, and then wipe the rest of the countertop down. If you don't have granite countertops, if you have Formica or some other material like that, email me privately and I can tell you the material of countertops that are acceptable to clean in this way. If you have any other material like Formica or something like that, they still need to be cleaned, but you have to use some kind of other countertop on top of that, because Formica or something like that can stain and is porous, and so chametz could still be there after cleaning it. So you need some kind of top to it to be used for Passover. Otherwise, granite is countertops, like I was describing, do not need an extra cover to them to use on Passover. You don't need to do that. Okay, so that's the cleaning for Passover. The last thing I wanted to talk about, yes, I think, so any questions about this, about the cleaning and the ensuring about the chametz or whatnot of the foods that we buy?
I have a question.
Yes, Fran.
Do you need to cover your interior inside the kitchen cabinets?
Oh, right, the pantry. Yeah, I don't. I say that you don't. Some people do because that's just their custom, that the way they were brought up. They have to, the pantry has to be emptied out and cleaned, because there are always crumbs that come out of a box or something like that. So all the shelves need to be cleaned thoroughly, and the floor of the pantry needs to be cleaned thoroughly. And anything that you're going to put back on the shelf, that is kosher for Passover, back on the shelf, it has to be wiped down also. Put it back, if the shelf is, if you are satisfied that there are no crumbs hiding in any corner of where the shelf meets the wall of the pantry, if you're satisfied that you can get into any nook and cranny, then you don't need any kind of contact paper or anything else to cover the shelves. If you're not satisfied, then you should cover it that way. That's the same like with your silverware drawer. If you take out if you're going to replace the year-round silverware in your drawers with the kosher for Passover drawers, with the kosher for Passover silverware, then you take out the non-kosher for Passover silverware, clean the drawer thoroughly. And then if you want, just for extra peace of mind, you could put lining down on the drawer, but you don't need to. Because once you clean it out thoroughly, make sure you got all the crumbs out of it, then you can put the kosher or Passover silverware in the drawer and it's totally fine. It's just an extra layer of, yes, so Mindy, I cover my laminate countertops with 3 layers of foil after I've thoroughly cleaned. Is that enough? 3 layers of foil. It's, Mindy, the answer to your question is if you were to cut anything on your countertop, if the way you cut goes all the way through the foil, then it's not enough. You have to cover it with something that if you're going to cut kosher or Passover food directly on the countertop, that the knife that you're using or whatever you're using to cut doesn't go through the covering all the way to the original laminate countertop. So the covering that you're using has to protect the countertop from the kosher for Passover food that is above it.
I generally also have a kosher for Passover chopping block that is only used for then.
Right, so if you don't cut directly onto your countertop, then that's totally fine. The 3 layers of foil should do it. Even 1 layer of foil should be fine. You just want to make sure it's enough that it just doesn't rip, and whatever you're putting down on the countertop, which is kosher for Passover, doesn't come into contact with the non-kosher for Passover countertop underneath. Okay. The last thing I wanted to get to, we have 8 minutes left, is about, just to reiterate about the uniqueness of Passover this year from a usual year, in that Passover starts on a Saturday night, which means that we have an extra day in which we have to be kosher for Passover. So we have Passover this year is then, kosher for Passover this year is going to be 9 days instead of 8 days, because we can't do any of this cleaning or getting rid of chametz on Shabbat, because those are works that are forbidden on Shabbat. So we have to be kosher for Passover ready by Friday morning. And so the complicated factor is, I think I had talked about this last time as well, that there is a tradition of eating challah on Shabbat. And not just a tradition, some see it as a mitzvah that you have to eat challah on Shabbat. We're remembering the 2 portions of manna that fell from heaven every day for 40 years in the desert. That extra portion of manna fell on Friday. That's why we have 2 loaves of challah every Friday night. So some see it as a mitzvah to eat challah on Passover. On Shabbat. So the problem is, how are you going to eat challah on Shabbat when it's Passover already? So there are some who will keep challah even though they've thoroughly cleaned their homes and gotten rid of the chametz. They will get rid of the chametz conditionally on the fact that they're going to be eating challah on Friday night and Shabbat morning. And keep that challah in a separate room, because invariably crumbs are going to fall from the challah when you eat it and put it down. And those crumbs are chametz that have to be gotten rid of. The easiest thing to do, and this is Moshe Feinstein, when he, may he rest in peace, was a noted posek, a halachic decision maker for the ultra-Orthodox community. He said back in the 50s and 60s, whenever he wrote this particular teshuvah, he said when Passover begins on Saturday night, we should, to make it easier for everyone, should eat egg matzah and use that to say hamotzi for Friday night and Shabbos lunch. So that you can't eat matzah on the day of the Seder either, because you can, matzah is made with flour and water. The matzah that we eat at the Seder has to be that plain matzah, the flour and water matzah. You shouldn't use egg matzah at your Seder. You should use the plain matzah at your Seder to fulfill the mitzvah at that point in the Seder, motzi matzah, that section of the Seder, maror motzi matzah maror korech shulchan arech, right? So the motzi matzah section is the matzah that is plain flour and water. So you can't eat that on the day of the Seder, which is this year, Friday night, Shabbat lunch. So to get around that, you eat egg matzah, Rabbi Feinstein says. So that's what we should do this year. So that way we won't have to worry about keeping challah in the house when it's already Passover, and not having to worry about eating plain matzah before the Seder. Eat egg matzah for Friday night and Shabbat, and say hamotzi over that, and we fulfill our requirement of saying hamotzi at our Shabbat meals. So this is what I wanted to share about kashrut for Passover. If we have time, a minute or two, if anybody has a question, and you can always email me privately or call me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have that could be unique to your own homes. Yes, Joe.
Last week, you told us about at Costco, there's a whole lamb because you're supposed to eat the whole lamb.
No, I'm just saying you can find whole lambs there. What I only brought that as an example of how big it is. I'm not saying it's kosher, it's halal. The Costco in Wheaton has halal whole lambs. They're halal.
Okay,
They're not kosher.
I'm not kidding here. It was cut up, right?
No, I don't know. It's right there, all stretched out. You've never seen this, Joe?
No,
No.
it's a whole, it's not cut up. It's a whole
It might
lamb
be a half of a lamb. It's a whole thing. Trust me, it's there.
with the head.
I think. Well, I haven't.
It's hanging on a hook.
Yeah, it's wrapped in this white cloth, and it's this huge thing. Yeah.
People don't
Yeah.
buy it whole.
Yes, they do. I'm telling you, they must, because they're there in the freezer in the halal section, which is next to the kosher section in Wheaton.
So probably very Orthodox people in Wheaton buy a whole lamb and cut it
No,
up.
it's not kosher. It's not kosher. It's halal.
Oh,
Halal is for Muslims.
I understand. I know
Right.
that.
Yeah. Let me just say, if you are Muslim and you follow halal rules, you can buy kosher certified meat. That satisfies the halal requirement. Halal requirement does not satisfy kosher requirement. It's slaughtered almost the same way, but it's not
Right.
slaughtered for halal. It's not slaughtered by a kosher ritual slaughterer.
Yeah,
Okay.
my father-in-law, the kosher butcher, had a lot of Muslim
Right.
customers.
It's hard to
in that whole
find
area.
halal back in the day. Now it's very common to find halal. And I remember my parents talking about this wholesale kosher meat place, Sandler's, in I think in Philadelphia, there where Muslim people would go to buy their meat too, because it was a kosher certified place, and the Muslim people would be in line buying the kosher food there too. But again, there are some, and we'll end with this. There's some of the slaughterhouses in the Midwest where they have the shochtim there, the black coat, black hat shochtim, are trained now not just to say the
I
bracha.
understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Let me just finish answering Joe's question here. Not just
Everybody can hear you.
the kosher slaughterer doesn't just say the bracha for slaughter. He'll also say the line in Arabic that a person slaughtering meat for a Muslim purpose will say. So the kosher, the trained Orthodox rabbi who's doing the slaughtering will say the bracha, sher kitchanu, whatever it is, and then also say something in Arabic in Allah's name. So, and that will count for halal as well. So it's 2:00. We're gonna end here for today. Again, if you have any other questions about kashrut for Passover, just email me, text me, call me anytime before Passover. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Yasher koach.
Stay safe and healthy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.